It's a Locked On crossover of Locked On Ducks and Locked On Nittany Lions today. Who catches Ohio State first? Who's ready for $40 million rosters in college football and straight seeding? Is that helping everyone? Let's talk about all that today.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for a crossover edition of Locked On Ducks and Locked On Nittany Lions. I'm Spencer McLaughlin. That is Zach Seyko. Thank you all for making this your first listen or your first view of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your number one source to stay up to date with whoever your favorite team is. We got a lot coming on today's show, which is brought to you by our friends at Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. So, Seyko, we're going to get to the straight seeding, which got announced late last week that I talked about on my Friday show. A little late for Oregon fans to get the playoff seeding they deserve, but hey, you know what? Better late than never. I want to start with this, though, and I know Oregon beat Ohio State in a nail-biter at home last year, but we all remember how the Rose Bowl went. The narrative with Penn State and playing Ohio State, I think we're all familiar with what that is at this point. In your view, between these two programs, who I think in the short term, and of course you throw Michigan into the fold as well, which program do you think consistently beats Ohio State first?
Well, it's Michigan, right? I mean, Michigan's the one that's tangibly done it.
I was going for between our two programs, but yes, Michigan is clearly an answer in there.
Yeah, I mean, Oregon did it. Penn State hasn't done it, but that doesn't mean they can't. So if we're talking about, what's going to happen next season or the year after, Penn State's best position to do that with a veteran quarterback is consistency within the offense. You just poached their defensive coordinator from them. So the team that had the number one defense, the defense that led them to a national title, complementary to what Chip Kelly and everything did last year, but you have a new quarterback, you have a new OC, you have a new DC, you also have a new first-time play caller. So when I see ESPN and the analytics say, oh, this is still the number one team in the country, I don't buy that. Pro Football Focus, I recently talked to one of their analysts within college football, and they said that Ohio State's closer to being a fringe top 10 team as opposed to being one of the consensus top 3 teams. So in my mind, this team is taking a step backwards. I think Penn State's taken enough of a step forward. I also think Oregon's taken a step backwards because new quarterback, new offensive line, relatively new defense, whereas Penn State's the most consistent out of what they're all returning from last season. And that's what won Ohio State a title. And aside from the alleged cheating scandal, what won Michigan a title because of the roster retention. It's just the natural attrition of college football. And now Penn State's ahead in that cycle.
Yeah, on the Michigan thing, just really quick.
Sure.
I don't subscribe to the notion because he was removed from the staff and then they went out and played the games and they looked mostly the same. Like they crossed they crossed a line, but like let's be honest, something that came out in the Netflix documentary in particular that was pretty startling, if you want to call it that, to me to hear was sign stealing in and of itself is in fact legal. It is not illegal to look across the sideline and try to decipher what a sign particular means. I think we all agree Michigan crossed a line, but Oregon and Penn State, Zach, I'm not reporting anything here. This is purely speculative on my part. If sign stealing or pushing the envelope in that regard happens at the highest level of college football, the reason I don't get on my moral high horse about Michigan is I'm not sure that Oregon isn't doing that. I don't know that they are doing it, but if it's legal, I think it happens a lot. I think that's just I think it's just kind of part of the game. Anyway, you brought that up, and do you feel the same way in that regard? Like for any fans that are like, oh, Michigan did this, I'm like, okay. Like I think all the major programs, including ours, are doing the same sorts of stuff because it's not illegal.
If you're going to send analysts and, we're deviating, but it's sending people to games and paying for tickets, allegedly. It's doing that stuff. But if you
line.
If you decipher it in the moment, because I don't have the same issue in baseball where if you figure out what a pitcher's doing, if a pitcher's tipping his pitches, that's illegal because you're smart enough to figure it out and they're dumb enough not to conceal it. So,
but then there's the Astros, who we all agree, and I think the Astros are worse than Michigan. Like, there's a line that you don't cross.
Apple Watches and stuff. Yeah, that was bad.
Right. Lines were crossed. Yeah.
So,
okay. Sorry. I just every time that comes up, I feel like, I don't want to give off the impression that I'm just trying to whistle past the graveyard on anything like that. But Michigan showed that with or without Connor Stallions, they can beat Ohio State. And I think for both of these programs, Seyko, the biggest area where you have to have a focus, and because the Big Ten is in the trenches, you cannot have average trench play out there, and that's why I'm happy that Oregon has prioritized defensive line recruiting, and why they have prioritized, I think, offensive line recruiting as well. Like, I think year in and year out, regardless of what talent leaves Ohio State on an annual basis, I think you can really confidently say, as a college football fan or just an observer of the sport, like, they're going to be really good up there. They're going to have guys, and that's how they, certainly they have really, really good wide receivers. You got to be able to match up with that as well. But, as you look at a snapshot for the next 3 years, I don't think that you can place a huge emphasis, or not that you shouldn't emphasize, recruiting great defensive backs. Oregon has done that, and I think the matchups with Ohio State have showed why they need to do that. But I think one of the reasons we can talk about our programs as being in the same class as Ohio State, or talking about whether or not they catch them or beat them on, a more annual basis rather than once in a while, is because they do have the trench play statistically to match up with them.
Yeah, I mean, that's why Georgia and Alabama were top for a long time, and why the SEC was dominating college football, aside from a bunch of reasons that I've talked about in our squad shows, is that, because of NIL, because of the transfer portal, they don't get to hide all of this massive amount of depth that they had at key positions. And it was just having offensive linemen to rotate through at any given time when somebody went down to injury. So if you're going to play in the SEC and the Big Ten, you need to be stout up front. And that's what Penn State is this season. They have 3 deep at offensive line. They have guys that, okay, would they be a bona fide star at somebody else's program as a third string tackle at Penn State? No, but I don't look at it as a significant drop off if 1 or 2 players end up missing time. And it also, long-term, it prevents injury. And that's ultimately what got Ohio State over the hump last season, because they did get banged up on the front 5 on the offensive line. And they were able to overcome it because of that key depth and able to move guys around because they were so versatile. So Penn State has this season. I can't speak to that for Oregon. You can obviously say so better, but if this game is won and lost in the trenches, Penn State is best suited out of anybody because of what they have on the offensive line.
Yeah, the change for Oregon's offensive line would certainly make it difficult, but Ohio State's got a lot of change. I think
they have 4 new starters.
Yeah, Oregon, you mean? Or Ohio State?
Both.
Yeah. Oregon and Ohio State both have, I believe it is, I think Ohio State is 4. I know that Oregon will be 4 new starters along that offensive line. Going back to the question I posed at the start of this segment, I think for this year, Seyko, Oregon doesn't have Ohio State on the schedule, could face them in the Big Ten championship game or in the playoff maybe. I do think this year, Penn State is more well-suited to beat Ohio State. In the next several years, though, I am taking Oregon with regards to that question of who catches Ohio State first, or who can match them on that level consistently and not just every once in a while. And I will tell you all why coming up next.
This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out or online shopping, entertainment, it's easy to lose track. And that's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center where you can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. You get surprising insights. So when I started using Monarch for myself, I realized just how much I was spending on different things. Dining out, or groceries, or package deliveries, you name it. Now I get to budget smarter and save more. You also get the all-in-one convenience. Instead of juggling multiple apps, You can use Monarch to check your finances, track your spending, and even plan long-term goals. You'll get easy collaboration. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track your shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without any of the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for, get this, 50% off your first year. That is right, 50% off your first year. That is monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year.
All right, Seyko. So here's why I like Oregon. It comes back to the recruiting for me. Penn State's a good recruiting school, to be sure. At the end of the day, though, I think the classes that are going to be able to go toe-to-toe with Ohio State, I mean, you tell me if I'm underselling Penn State's recruiting there, but Oregon has recruited over the last several years and continues to recruit at a way that goes toe-to-toe with Ohio State, not just for the same players, but just the overall talent that you have in the class. It's not that Penn State doesn't recruit well, but in the next several years, I think that's one of the reasons, not the only one certainly, why Oregon was able to beat Ohio State this year. And Penn State has done that, once in the James Franklin era back in 2016, and it took Dan Lanning's third year to be able to at least, be competitive on the same field with him. And I think the recruiting is a part of that. Dan Lanning went out and pulled in back-to-back top 5 classes, and certainly will push for another top 10 class in this upcoming cycle. 2023 was a top 10 class. That's where I think Oregon separates from Penn State in the race to, get to Ohio State's level.
Do we want to talk about why that is? Because it's in the bullet point, the $40 million roster, allegedly. And the
$40 million roster hasn't actually materialized, allegedly, because the alleged numbers from this past year, whatever they were in the $18 to $20 million range. But they could go out to $40 million, or at least that's what reports seem to indicate, is that they could get to that point.
Oregon and Ohio State's NIL situation is in a much better spot than Penn State's. Penn State has caught up to where it's relevant, but they're still within the top 10. If you look at any metric, Oregon and Ohio State's are ahead. And whether you want to use that as like, hey, good on Oregon and Ohio State because they've adapted with the times and that's Penn State's problem to figure out, or it's just the realistic answer. There's no good or bad of it. It's that if you have millions of dollars more to spend and commit to roster construction, you're probably going to have a better roster. So Ohio State and Oregon are 2 of the alleged 6 teams that would have this projected $40+ million roster because of rev share, which gives you that extra, give or take $16 million with what you can use from the trust agreement that's going to be settled within the, in the courts and everything.
And the house settlement, you mean?
The house settlement.
House.
Pardon me, not courts. The house settlement. And then you add that to the NIL figure that was from last. So Ohio State had 23, 24, 25 million in NIL.
I don't think we actually know what the hard numbers are because
That's
the NIL.
Estimate?
Because it's estimate, guesses, rumor, and all that stuff, like in the 20-ish million range without having a concrete number. And the reason that I don't think anybody actually knows is because the collectives are separate from the schools. They're third-party entities, so they don't
have to answer to that.
Yeah, they don't have to disclose anything, whereas public universities do have to disclose certain financials. But collectives, of course, do not, and so that's why it's kind of like it's in that sort of range, and you could take that to mean it's more than what gets reported because they don't want the big numbers being out there, or you could take that to mean, and I tend to be in this camp, it's a little less than what people speculate about because they're trying to overinflate their value. That's just my take on it.
It is what it is. That's why there is this case. That's why they're trying to that's why somebody with some sort of power had to figure it out because the rich were only going to continue to get richer. And Penn State's trying to move itself into that class where they can say, okay, we're also one of the top 5 schools or top 6, whatever, right? Splitting hairs at that point. Penn State would rather be in there so that they can compete for a national title in this age of college football. I don't like it regardless. It doesn't matter. Just throw whatever. Texas Tech is in this conversation, for crying out loud, because one of their investors decided to liquidate a portion of their shares and just devote it entirely. Like, That is not good for the sport. Okay. It is not good because there's no competitive balance. So, okay, well, instead of having the same 4 teams, you now just have the same 8, give or take 10. But what it also does is it pushes everyone else to the side. But back to relevant to what is Oregon and Penn State in this conversation is that Oregon has its resources figured out. And that is partially why recruiting is in a better spot because you can offer more guarantees in NIL than Penn State can. Dan Lanning's a phenomenal recruiter. That's a phenomenal staff. But if you are going to win a 50-50 battle here and Oregon's willing to throw X amount of millions of dollars at a prospect, I imagine they're probably going to choose that.
Well, I mean, yes, when that does come up, the way I've always looked at it for Oregon is NIL is not a reason for a kid to not choose Oregon, because the offer isn't enough. Other places might have offered more, the Jackson Cantwell commitment, for instance, like the phrase unlimited NIL does not exist. No matter how people want to portray Nike and Phil Knight and the relationship with the Ducks and all of that sort of stuff, like unlimited NIL doesn't exist, or else Jackson Cantwell would be a Duck because Miami offered him, I think it was $2.5 million or so. And if it was truly unlimited, did Oregon want him? Yeah, of course they did. That's why they recruited him. That's why they had him on visits. That's why they, invested the money that they did put into that recruitment to try to get him to commit. It's not like they were doing it just for fun. So if they did truly have, the unlimited NIL that gets just thrown out into the ether and just kind of left there, and then it just gravitates towards Oregon's program to get labeled in that regard, then Oregon would have put it $3 million out there, right? Like, I think that the NIL conversation with Oregon can oftentimes be really low-hanging fruit for people because the Nike-Oregon connection has been long documented. And I'm not someone that tries to downplay it, run from it, hide it, or anything like that. I think it just makes Oregon a really easy NIL boogeyman. I think Texas A&M can go into that category a bit as well.
They can't because of the Jimbo Fisher payout. That's the reason they're not there, but they would do it. That's why I mentioned Texas Tech.
Yeah, well, and Texas Tech has, got a billionaire who's involved with I'm pretty sure Cody Campbell's a billionaire and who's running their NIL collective. And there's kind of a similar, not entirely similar, but the Texas oil money is kind of the generic, dispersion that gets cast at any Texas school is big in NIL. Oh, well, they've got oil money. That still doesn't click in people's minds as easily as Nike. Because you think Nike, you see what's on my shirt right here. You see the swoosh. You think of Phil Knight, and everybody knows who that is. So I do want to pose this question to you. If we get to the point, and I do agree with you. I fully admit that Oregon benefits from it, and as long as the system allows for Oregon to spend whatever they want, I think they should spend whatever they want. I don't like that the Dodgers are allowed to exist in Major League Baseball. Yep. My frustration with that is not with the Dodgers. Because if it were my team, and the Mariners will never do this because their owner is cheap and he's pathetic, if they ever were to be in that position to spend more money than anyone, I would want them to. I wish they would. I wish they would just spend the average amount. And so the frustration comes back to the system. And even though I think Oregon is adept to succeed in any environment that college football has, whether it's NIL, the portal, or all of that, like they've succeeded across several eras at this point. I don't think they're limited to, well, they only recruit well because of NIL. No, they have NIL and they recruit well. But Dan Lanning would be pulling in top 10 classes. Maybe they wouldn't be top 5. You want to put that qualifier in there? We'll never really know. But Oregon has succeeded across several eras of college football, and they've adapted to any sort of landscape change that has been thrown at them. And I do think having a salary cap for this sort of stuff is beneficial for the sport. I do think that is a good idea. Where that number is, I don't know. But if we don't get there, Seyko, then how do you see Penn State going forward? Are they just going to go into every season knowing we're a top 10, 15 NIL or revenue sharing program with our athletes, and Ohio State and Oregon are top 5, and that's just the way it's always going to be, and we have to do a microdose of money balling this?
Yes, To answer that directly, yes, it's that the stars will have to align together like they are with bringing back Drew Aller, Nicholas Singleton, K. Trenon to address that directly there. I want to talk to Major League Baseball briefly, not go off on an entire tangent, but I'd love to see you as a Locked On Mariners host. That's one thing.
I would do it. We have two guys who I listen to and do a really good job. But if that ever came open, might ditch the college football show.
The second part of this, though, and actually relevant to the conversation, is the fact that Major League Baseball is different, is that the ownership groups can spend money. They have the option to spend money. Tulane doesn't have the option to financially go toe-to-toe with Oregon. Rutgers doesn't have the option to go toe-to-toe with, there's rev sharing now. Okay, that creates $16 million. This is why I don't like college football right now in its present state, is because at this very given moment, and hopefully this changes with the House settlement, it's who is the best at fundraising, who is the best at crowdsourcing. And right now I
think that's a little simplistic.
Like that's what it is.
It's a big
basketball.
It's a factor. I'm not denying that it exists, but just because you have money does not mean you will succeed. See, Texas A&M or Texas until the last 2 years was a wildly
you get a head start.
Yeah, you can give yourself an advantage, but to say that Ohio State just went out and bought a national championship and that's all it was and anybody could do that.
Competitive advantage. I'm not saying it's the end all be all, but it gives you a head start over everybody else that can't financially compete.
Yeah,
Tulane would love to get in a bidding war with somebody. They can't.
You have an advantage. I fully agree with that. I didn't want it to get portrayed as like it's as simple as, all you have to do is come up with the money and then you're going to be there. Like there are only about 5,000 other factors that go in, but
money solves a lot of problems.
Not all of them, but yes,
a lot of them. And it's Ohio State didn't buy a national championship, but they were 1 to 2. They were 1, 2, 3 players away, and they got Quinshon Judkins, Caleb Downs, and Will Howard. How were they able to do that? Because they had ultra competitive NIL.
Yeah, no, I'm not disagreeing with that. Most of their roster was guys they recruited and then retained with NIL to be sure. But like it's a factor that you have to have, but it doesn't guarantee that you're going to have the sort of season that Ohio State had last year or be the sort of team that they were or that Oregon was last year or that Penn State was last year. There are schools across the country that had the caliber of funds rather that Penn State probably has. And guess what? They weren't as good. Why? Because they don't have as good of a Florida is a good example here, at least that pops into my head. I cannot imagine they are wildly short on dollars at Florida or, Texas A&M is the same way, right? Like they have got boatloads of cash. Did they have as good a season as Penn State? No. Why? Because Penn State was a more well-run organization, and it was Mike Elko's first year. Why? Because Jimbo Fisher stunk pretty much. So, I think we can put a pin in that conversation, certainly for now. Yeah, for now. But I do want to get to the straight seeding that came out and get your thoughts on that, because Oregon fans are thinking, wow, too little, too late. But, hey, better late than never, guys, right? So it was announced late last week, Seyko, that the College Football Playoff Committee is doing what they always should have done, which is we're going to seed you based on the season that you have had and with our metrics and whatnot. And the top 4 seeds are going to be the top 4 teams in our rankings, which it's mind-boggling that wasn't the case before. But you had the number, 10 or 11 seed in Boise State getting a first round bye and being the number 4 seed in the playoff. It never made sense. It never made sense. I am fine having automatic berths for conference champions. What I was never okay with was the automatic first round bye or having to be a conference champion. That was always ridiculous to me. The other change I would like to see them implement is that if you have the sort of regular season, because I'm a big prioritize the regular season, keep the emphasis there, and the urgency that has made college football special my whole life. If you have a better regular season, then you should be rewarded with a home playoff game. I thought the way they did it last year, where they give home playoff games to the teams outside the top 4, and then the teams that are in the top 4, you don't get a home playoff game. I'm sitting there going, wait, clearly a home game is the most advantageous outcome that you can have. Why don't the teams that didn't have as good of a season go and play neutral site games earlier and then have to play a road game? And that way you actually have an incentive, because what we saw last year, and I had a take on it, and I have reversed my position having seen what, we all saw, because I think I was just wrong on this. I thought Oregon wanted to win the Big Ten championship game. They would have been better off losing it. That is unequivocally true. And Penn State was better off for losing it. Texas was better off losing the SEC championship. That should never be the case.
Yeah, the issue is primarily that, the conference championships, they hurt you more than they help you. The second part of that is it really comes down to Boise State, because as we all know, any of those other teams that would have played within the MAC that made the college football playoff would have gone undefeated. If they played the same schedule that Boise State, they played Oregon. Okay, but I'm talking about the same conference schedule. You would have ended up in the exact same position. You would have won a conference title. So Penn State, you dropped them in the Mountain West, not the MAC. You drop them into the Mountain West, Penn State would have won a conference title. Ohio State would have won a conference title. Oregon won. And so you're rewarding Boise State for beating feeble competition with a 4 seed when you know very well that everybody else would have had the same results and better margins of victory and all that stuff, but they get the bye. The analytics matter because there is no objective measure for college football before the playoff. There's no objective measure. It's not like in the NFL where you have win your division, right? And just be one of the top 7 teams.
Which they just changed, by the way. I don't know if you saw that in the NFL. The NFL just said winning your division now no longer guarantees you a home playoff game. A move I think is
they
perfectly...
finally changed that?
They did, yeah.
Oh, fine. Oh, my goodness.
Okay. Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Because you shouldn't just... Again, having the automatic berth, fine.
The 7-9 Seattle Seahawks get a home game against the 12-4,
baby,
or whatever, 11-5 New Orleans Saints.
Yeah,
that's what I mean. So it's the same case now. I'm glad it took them just a year in college football to figure that out. Boise State shouldn't be rewarded for beating up on Mountain West teams that would never even have a chance.
And it doesn't mean they shouldn't be in the playoff.
No.
I think they should. I fully support a G5 automatic.
Not as a top 4 team.
Right. It's just them being a top 4 team. It's like, what are we doing? What are we doing?
I'm also not so sure about as cool as the home playoff games are, because that's where it's we'll preserve the tradition of college football. Okay, that's how you're taking a piece of that and having these home playoff games. But should SMU really be traveling to Penn State? And I'm saying that as the Penn State podcast host, but this is for the sake of college football. Yes, win your games and be in a position to host. You could easily simply make that argument, but SMU going to Penn State in the dead of winter did not do them any favors. Okay. Where it's better to play in Texas. Here's the thing though. It is better to play in Texas in the middle of December than it is to play in Pennsylvania, objectively.
Well, yeah, of course it's easier. I don't know if you ever saw the Dylan Gabriel interview where he was talking about playing in bad weather. He prefers playing in warm weather. He's of course now on the Cleveland Browns. So he's going to have to get used to that. But I didn't have a problem with that because Penn State plays in a better conference and made their conference championship game. Now, so too did SMU, but in not as strong of a conference. Like, I didn't have a problem with that because I watched the Big Ten and the ACC, and the Big Ten is a significantly tougher league. I'd have to go back and analyze, the strength of schedule metrics and all that sort of stuff. But like what I have always...
I'm fine with more neutral site games is what I'm saying. And I'm fine if they take away the home field advantage.
I think the first round should be the neutral site games.
I'm indifferent.
Peach, cotton, orange, fiesta, put them in the first round. Next round you play on home sites, because that way you keep the incentive to win a conference championship, you keep the incentive to win regular season games. That's always been my biggest gripe with expanding the playoff, is you have now minimized a bunch of regular season games, and you have added importance to games that involve teams who we all know are not winning a national championship. This is not college basketball. This is college football. There are too many guys on the field that you have to be able to overcome talent-wise to go out there and say you could pull an upset and go on a run. An upset could happen from time to time. Sure, which is why I'm not against them being in the playoff necessarily. I am against, Ohio State loses to Michigan last year, and it doesn't matter. It did not matter one bit. It didn't matter. Like, that's what eats away at me. For me as a college football fan, like that just, it bugs me. So I'm glad that they've gotten to the straight seeding. I think for our schools, I think what's good for everybody else is good for both of our schools. Maybe not this past season necessarily, because Penn State losing the Big Ten title game wouldn't have been an advantage. It would have been, in theory, a disadvantage. But last year, if Oregon had, won the Big Ten as they did, and they had this seeding system, they would have played the winner of, I believe it was Boise State and Indiana for their first game. And Boise almost got them once. They weren't gonna make those same mistakes because they were a significantly better team. Indiana, we saw, was an incredible story. Not as good. Like, I feel really good about Oregon winning those particular games. So, yeah. Any final thoughts?
Penn State could have met Oregon in that hypothetical. Well, they probably would have played Notre Dame, so I guess you have that one play out, and then it would have been Oregon, Notre Dame in the semifinal there. But Penn State would have had a bye too, so I totally get where you're coming from.
Yeah, and I mean the bye is a bigger benefit in the NFL than it is in college because the layoff is so long. Like, Oregon played, what was the Big Ten championship game, like December 7th or something, and then they didn't play a football game again until January 1st, and when they came out against. Yeah, they came out against Ohio State. They looked sloppy. They looked rusty. They looked lethargic a little, and then it was just too late. Ohio State was really good. Like, that just might have been inevitable, but you go from beating a team to 34-0. Like, yeah, it might have played a factor. Zach Seyko, Locked On Nittany Lions. I'm Spencer McLaughlin of Locked On Ducks. This has been a Locked On College crossover. We'll see you next time, everybody. Until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.